You know how sometimes you're just swimming in information, trying to make sense of it all? And, well, you've probably wondered, maybe late at night, what does it actually mean to know something?
Yeah, that fundamental question.
Exactly. And that's what we're really going to try and unpack in this deep dive. We've been looking at this fascinating discussion from Professor Jennifer Nagel, University of Toronto, that was on Big Think.
Hmm.
And look, this isn't just, philosophy in an ivory tower. It feels surprisingly relevant to how we all kind of operate every day.
It really is. So our mission here, if you like, is to pull out the core ideas from Nagel's take on knowledge. Like, what does knowing genuinely involve? How's it different from just, say, believing?
Right.
And maybe most importantly, why does figuring this out actually, matter?
Okay, let's get right into it then. Nagel kicks off with this pretty central concept she calls knowing a factive attitude. What does that actually mean for us sort of in practice?
Well, factive attitude, it basically boils down to this.
Yeah.
If you know something, that something has to be true. It's linked to fact.
Okay.
You can believe things that aren't true all day long, right? Or suspect something false. We all do it. But you can't genuinely know something that isn't actually the case.
Ah, okay, that clicks. The article used those examples, didn't it? Like, Jane believes she's being followed.
Right.
Well, maybe she is, maybe not. Her belief doesn't guarantee it. But if Roger knows he's being followed.
Then he is being followed. It's built in.
Exactly. The truth is part of the definition of knows in that sentence. So I guess straight away that tells you that when someone claims to know, you should focus on the truth of the claim, not just how sure they sound. That's a pretty useful filter, isn't it?
Absolutely. And Nagel sort of maps this out further. She shows how knowing sits in a category with other factive states, like seeing or realizing or remembering. If you remember doing something, you actually did it. But then there are the non-factive ones, believing, suspecting, assuming, even being totally certain about something.
Yeah, you can be completely certain and completely wrong. I think we've all been there.
Oh, definitely. So some mental states just have this built-in connection to reality, this truth requirement. And others, well, they don't.
She had that analogy, the truth only pass. Can you explain that a bit?
Yeah, think of it like a special pass for an event called reality, a factive attitude, like knowing is a pass that only works if the event is actually happening, if the thing is true.
Okay.
If you know it, your mental pass is valid because the event, the truth, is real. If you just believe it, your pass might look the same, feel the same, but the event itself might be canceled, the thing might be false. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It's a good visual. Now, the discussion also goes into how we use, chatting day to day versus how philosophers pick it apart. Sounds like a bit of a disconnect there.
Oh, there really can be. In everyday life, we're pretty loose with it, aren't we? I know it's going to rain, my knee aches.
Right.
But a philosopher hears that and goes, whoa, hang on. No. How reliable is your knee? What's the evidence? That kind of thing.
So that intense scrutiny, that philosophical deep dive, Nagel says it can lead to a collapse of certainty. That sounds dramatic.
It can feel that way. When you start questioning everything, are my senses reliable? Is my memory faulty? Can I trust this source? You can spiral into feeling like, well, maybe I don't really know anything for sure. Nagel compares it to that unsettling vibe you get from philosophical skepticism, or even how filmmakers use doubt to create tension and uncertainty. Ever felt that?
Yeah.
When you really pull at a thread you thought was solid.
Oh, yeah, definitely. That feeling of the ground being a bit shaky underneath. And Nagel seems pretty clear that total skepticism, the idea we can't know anything, is, what does she call it? A pestiferous illusion.
Yeah, pestiferous. I like that. She argues it's basically self-defeating.
How so?
Well, if someone claims, I know that we can't know anything, they've kind of shot themselves in the foot, haven't they?
Ah, right. They're claiming to know something is unknowable.
Exactly. It contradicts itself. She calls it a second-order illusion.
Yeah.
An illusion about how our knowledge, or lack thereof, even works.
Gotcha. The old paradox trick. So to give us some context, she brings in some philosophical heavyweights, like René Descartes.
Right. Mr. I think, therefore I am. He famously started by doubting absolutely everything, trying to find one single thing he could know with absolute certainty, these clear and distinct ideas.
Okay, but build knowledge from zero.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
But Nagel suggests that this hunt for absolute, unshakable certainty might set the bar so high that it doesn't really reflect how we actually use and rely on knowledge in, real life.
And then on the other side, there's G.E. Moore.
Yeah, Moore took a very different tack, much more common sense. He'd famously say things like, here is one hand holding it up, and here is another. basically arguing that extreme skepticism is just kind of silly when faced with obvious reality.
So Moore's like, come on, obviously we know some things. Where does Nagel land between these two for us?
She argues for a kind of middle path. Don't just wave away skeptical challenges. They raise good points about evidence and justification. But also, don't let them paralyze you into thinking knowledge is impossible.
Okay.
She wants us to appreciate the complexity, the nuances of knowing, without getting totally lost in the weeds of doubt. Which feels more practical, doesn't it?
Yeah, it definitely feels more usable day to day. Now, another interesting idea that comes up is treating knowing as gradable. Like the word tall, how does that work?
It's this 20th century idea. Think about tall. What counts as tall for a person is different from what counts as tall for a building, right?
Completely different scale.
Exactly. The standard shifts with the context. The suggestion is that maybe knowing works a bit like that too.
So the level of evidence or certainty required to say, something might change depending on the situation.
Precisely. Telling your friend you know the traffic will be bad because it's Friday afternoon. That's one standard. A scientist saying they know a vaccine is effective based on rigorous trials, that's operating with a much, much higher standard. The stakes are different, the context is different.
Right. Nagel uses that metaphor of a dimmer switch, not just an on-off light.
Yeah, I like that one. Knowledge isn't always just yes, no, no, known. There can be degrees, and the level of brightness needed depends on what you're doing. Are you just making small talk, or are you performing surgery?
That makes a lot of sense for why the word feels so flexible. Okay, now this next connection is really intriguing. Nagel links understanding knowledge to the whole philosophical puzzle of free will. How do those connect?
It's a bit more subtle, this one. But her idea, as I understand it, is that both concepts, knowledge and free will, are deeply tied to our sense of being an agent in the world. Being conscious, aware, making choices, acting based on what we understand.
Okay, agency.
Yeah. So she suggests that if we can get a clearer picture of what it means for us to know something, how our minds connect to reality, how we justify beliefs, it might shed some light on how we function as agents, which is central to the free will debate. It's about understanding ourselves as conscious beings interacting with the world.
Definitely makes you think, doesn't it?
It really does. I hadn't considered that angle before. So wrapping things up a bit, why does Nagel argue that getting a handle on the nature of knowledge actually matters in our everyday lives? It's clearly not just for philosophers debating in seminar rooms.
No, absolutely not. She really stresses the practical side. Think about it. Our understanding of knowledge shapes almost everything. Social interactions, who we trust, how we learn, how we teach. Even things like legal responsibility or ethical judgments often hinge on what someone knew or should have known.
There was that quote, something like, every conversation is shaped by the dynamic between what's known and unknown. Exactly. That really captures it. We're constantly navigating this terrain. What do I know? What do you know? What's uncertain? Having a better grasp of what knowing really entails can help us be, well, maybe more critical thinkers, better communicators.
More aware of our own limits, too, maybe.
For sure. More aware of both the power and the pitfalls of our own understanding.
Okay, so to quickly recap for everyone listening, we've talked about Nagel's idea that knowing is factive, it has to connect to truth.
Right.
We looked at that tension between just casually saying, I know, and the deep philosophical questions that can sometimes make certainty feel wobbly.
The collapse of certainty, yeah.
And Nagel's pushback against total skepticism, the idea that it's sort of self-defeating.
And finding that middle ground.
Right, between Descartes' radical doubt and Moore's common sense. Plus, this idea of knowledge being gradable, like a dimmer switch, depending on context.
And that surprising little link to free will and agency.
All leading to the idea that understanding knowledge really is practical. It affects our daily interactions.
Exactly. So maybe the thing to reflect on now is how these ideas resonate with your own experience, how you evaluate information, how certain you feel about things.
Yeah, maybe think about a time you were totally convinced you knew something, but then, oops, turned out you didn't.
We've all been there.
How might these distinctions, factivity, context, standards, help make sense of that experience? And maybe more importantly, how could this deeper dive affect how you approach information, claims, and certainty going forward?
Good questions to mull over. And if you do want to dig deeper into Professor Nagel's own words, we'll have a link to that original Big Think article available. Definitely worth exploring further.